Okay. Hey, Jay. I'm here with Jay McTighe, assessment expert in understanding by design. Worked with Grant Wiggins for a long time. I think your reputation precedes you, so I'm not going to do a long introduction. It's really great to just chat with you about assessment for this course that we're offering on rethinking assessments. And I thought it would be interesting to start just to get people to see a little bit of what you see. And so the question that I have is, what is a great assessment that you've seen recently, and can you deconstruct it for us? Like, what makes it great? Like, what are you looking at when you are evaluating or kind of just assessing an assessment?
Well, thanks, Michael. I'm happy to be with you. I'm going to preface my answer to your question with an underlying premise about assessment, which is my contention is we should think about assessment according to its primary purpose, which I believe is to advance learning. Now, certainly there are other purposes for assessment, including evaluation. We see that in accountability testing in state and national standardized tests. We also know that assessments are used to evaluate student achievement, manifest often in grading practices. We also look at assessments that may be used for program evaluation. How well is our new mathematics textbook program working? And assessments are used for selection purposes, whether it's placement in a, quote, gifted program or selection for a magnet school or university admissions. So all of these are legitimate purposes for assessment. But my contention is that when we think about the varied purposes for assessment, we should operate assessments in ways that don't undercut the primary purpose, which I believe is to advance learning, especially for school and classroom-based assessments. So having said that, let me answer your question. The assessment that comes to mind immediately is actually a project that has an assessment component. And the project is an amazing one developed by a friend of mine in New Jersey, a fellow named Mark Wise. He developed this project, which now has been running for 6 or 7 years, I believe, in a public school district in West Windsor, Plainsboro, New Jersey. The project is a week-long. It's called the Global Challenge Project, and it's literally run the last week of school for 8th graders in 2 middle schools. I could go into detail about it, but I'll try to be brief. The essence of the project, which the kids know about in advance, they get to pick one of the United Nations global challenges. And these are very authentic and big problems, like ensuring a sustainable water supply for a region of the world, eradicating hunger, supporting economic development, and so on. So the kids in advance get to review the global challenges. They get to pick one that they're interested in working on, and every student gets his or her first choice. They're then assigned to a team, I believe it's 4 or maybe 5 students, and they have an entire week to research the problem or the challenge, to come up with an idea that they think could help to address the problem. They write a brief, a kind of a written brief describing their analysis of the problem and their proposed solution. They then prepare a presentation, which is given at the end of the week to an adult panel of judges, some of whom are experts in the challenge area, by the way. And the kids present as in a Shark Tank-like a pitch, where they're basically presenting to get their proposed solution funded. And the judges will judge their written paper and their oral presentation against an established set of criteria. So that's the week-long project. It is an engaging project. It's a learning experience, but it is also an assessment. Kids are assessed on well-developed rubrics. So what makes it an effective assessment for me? There are quite a number of components. One, this is truly challenging. This is not seeing if kids can spit back information they've memorized on a test. This is authentic, challenging application of knowledge and skills around a real-world problem. The focus of this project is on arguably important skills: critical thinking, problem solving, research, communication, both written, oral, and multimedia, and the ability to work effectively in groups. There's a real audience. They're not presenting this to the teacher to be graded. They're presenting it in front of adult panels. The criteria are known in advance, and they have rubrics for critical analysis, or research and critical analysis, problem solving, and effectiveness of their communication, both written and oral, and a rubric on how well they work in groups. There's student choice in the product, or in the project, as well as student direction along the way. The kids determine how they organize and what they decide and what they communicate. And finally, students are engaged in self-assessment, both on their product and how well they worked effectively in teams. So I recognize that this is not, quote, a normal assessment. It's not like a Friday quiz, but to me, it's a rich assessment that clearly promotes learning, as well as gives us measures of important learnings and important goals of a modern education. So let me pause on that note.
I mean, I love that. That's great. And we'll link to that project. We can add it as a resource that folks can click out of this and take a look at. I mean, I love all of that. That sounds like the kind of project that a lot of teachers are creating. And I'm curious, what's the science behind some of this? What does current research say to back up these? I mean, it seems like these are best practices that we need to be following as educators. How is the research backing all of that up?
Well, I'm not so sure that the research is specific to assessment, other than, for example, research on feedback and the importance of feedback in learning. And I'll come in on that in a little more detail shortly. But I would rather focus on research as well as experience of teachers and students around this question. What are the factors that will influence the students' willingness to put forth effort, try to do their best in school? And I think that is pretty clear, those elements. One is there has to be goal clarity. In other words, the student needs to know what they're working toward, what the goal is, what the expectations are. If the goal is not clear, it's hard to marshal your energy to do your best. And in fact, this is one of the challenges, arguably, in standardized testing, that it's not always clear what will be on the test. I mean, broadly speaking, they say, oh, we're assessing the standards, but it could be any number of things. As opposed to the task I just described, where it was crystal clear what the goals were and how students would be evaluated. So task and goal clarity are important. A second factor is relevance. Does the student perceive that the learning goal and the associated assessments are worthwhile learning and working toward? I have to say that I think in many cases in schools, what kids are being asked to do, particularly in the form of test prep ditto worksheets, multiple choice practice tests, are not particularly engaging because students don't see them as relevant or meaningful in some cases. And so as much as we can craft our learning goals and appropriate assessments around relevant and authentic goals, I think we can increase student willingness to put forth effort and enhance motivation to learn. A third important factor is a student's perceived ability to be at least moderately successful in reaching a learning goal or doing well on an assessment. And this factor is significant in a number of ways, and it has implications for assessment practices. Once again, if teachers present students not only with the goal and show its relevance, but also are clear about how students' work will be judged. For example, that means not only presenting the criteria or the rubric for an open-ended task, but showing models and examples so kids can actually see in tangible ways what excellent, good, fair, and poor looks like. Because my experience is just giving students a rubric with a bunch of words doesn't ensure that all kids know what that rubric means or how good is good enough. But when you see examples that you can study and learn from, that increases your capacity to, hey, I could do this, or I'm not going to make that mistake if they see a bad one.
And there's no one right answer.
There's not one right answer to open-ended assessment tasks. Similarly, another capacity or factor in that third capacity of being aware that you have the potential to be successful has to do with how the teacher supports and works with students. And that's where the role of feedback becomes really important. I'm going to say more about that shortly.
Yeah, let's dive in there. I mean, let's talk about feedback. We can jump around. You know, what is the relationship between feedback and assessment? What makes for good feedback, and what are we looking for there?
Well, in the case of feedback, I think the research is unquestionably clear. Number one, giving students timely and specific feedback is one of the most significant factors that improves learning and achievement. We just know this. Research from Dylan William and Bob Marzano and John Hattie and others have confirmed this unequivocally. But to be effective, feedback has certain qualities. It needs to be specific. And some teachers believe that if they give students a quiz and give the quiz back, that's feedback. Well, unless there's detailed commentary on what the kids missed, giving them a B plus or a comment like work harder next time, that's not feedback. Feedback has to be specific relative to your performance against the goal. Second, it has to be understandable to the learner. So the language of the feedback needs to be, I guess, understandable. Sorry for the phone in the background there. If I can cut that off. A third factor of feedback is it must be timely. This is one of the quintessential reasons that most standardized tests aren't particularly helpful to enhance learning. You don't get the results back for 2 weeks or 3 months. But classroom assessments can be timely. And a fourth and really important quality of feedback is there has to be an opportunity built in for the students to make use of the feedback. Just returning a student's draft paper with comments is incomplete unless you also let the student revise. I like to say that feedback without opportunity to use it is like eating without digesting. It's incomplete. So these are the qualities that make good feedback, and the best teachers understand this and use it. And we know it makes a difference in students' performance, but also in their belief that they can learn and achieve because they know that feedback is going to be provided.
Yeah, we've seen, some amazing work with some of our faculty too on modeling how to give feedback to students and then having students learn and practice over the course of a term, providing each other with feedback. So, they're learning to think like an expert in a way and to look at a peer's work in an analytical way. And it's amazing.
No, I completely agree.
Yeah. So I'm going to jump to one of the things we've been talking a lot about at GOA is rethinking school, of which rethinking assessments is an element. And with everything that needs to be rethought and retaught and coached, et cetera, within schools, what are the systems our schools have in place that need to change to support how we assess and how we can change?
Well, from a systems point of view, I'll be a little coy and say, read my 2 books. One is Schooling by Design with Grant Wiggins, and a more recent one is entitled Leading Modern Learning. Both of those books describe more systemic ways in which schools and school districts can approach curriculum and assessment and instruction and the reporting systems that go along with that, including grades and report cards. I think there are fundamental systemic changes needed. But just for the purpose of this short interview, let me give you a more practical and specific frame for what we can do to improve assessment in schools right now. And my proposition is that teachers should think of themselves more like coaches, athletic coaches, and or sponsors of extracurricular activities like drama, debate, band, and so on. And so what do I mean by that? And what would that look like in classrooms? So I have, I think, 6 points. One is I propose that we frame our curriculum and our teaching and our assessment around what I call performance goals. Rather than saying, you got to learn all this material that I have to cover, it's in the grade level standards, I'd rather have teachers and curriculum teams say, what do we want students to be able to do with their learning? And if you think about it, a coach doesn't feel they have to cover the playbook play by play. They always coach with the game in mind. They're coaching with performance in mind, and they use the playbook as a resource based on the players they have and the needs that those players show. And I think a quintessential shift that would be to the good would be to get away from this coverage mentality. You got to cover all this content and hope it sticks, to a performance-based orientation.
Can I ask a question there, Jay?
Of course.
I'm wondering, in this analogy, what's the game that we're preparing them for? Is it college, or is it life?
I'll give you my thoughts on that. I think the game is that students are able to apply their learning to new situations within and outside of school, and that we plan a curriculum backward from that. Now, I've written about, and that's where the books come in, I've written about the idea of developing a curriculum and assessment system around what I call long-term transfer goals. And the transfer goals are within subjects, they're discipline-based, but there are some that cut across subjects, like the ability to critically appraise content, the capacity to communicate effectively for different audiences, purposes, and through different media, and the ability to work with others. The so-called 21st century skills that all the employers are clamoring for need to be a part of our thinking. But so too do the important learnings that have evolved in the disciplines. So my answer to your question is, let me turn it around. If our goal is college, career, and civic preparation, we have to ask the question, what do we want students to be able to do well to succeed in higher ed, on the job, and in their role as citizens? And we can identify a relatively small number of what I call long-term transfer goals. That's the game that I think we want kids to play.
Great, I love that.
Now, a couple of the other ones then. So coaches always use pre-assessments right in the beginning of a season or the beginning of a club. For extracurriculars, the coach wants to find out what the players or what the members of the group know and can do. And based on that, they can then begin to plan their practices. Likewise, effective coaches are always assessing. Formative ongoing assessment is the essence of coaching. In a sense, coaching is formative assessment and feedback. That's what you do in practice, but it's always geared toward the game. Thirdly, there's direct instruction needed in coaching. If you don't know the rules of the game, you can't play it well. If you haven't developed basic skills of the game, you're not going to be effective on the field or on the court. But there are also strategies, and we know that from coaching, that a team can be athletic and skilled, but not play smart. That there are what I would call understandings about the game, otherwise known as strategies, that are also imparted. So to say that we have a performance-based orientation in no way is meant to suggest that teachers don't teach anymore. Of course they do. There's a place for direct instruction. There's a place for ongoing assessment and feedback, otherwise known as coaching. But everything is directed toward what we want the players to be able to do on their own. It's independent and authentic performance is our focus. Finally, coaches and sponsors differentiate. Whether it's we have players that play different positions and need different preparation for those positions, or we have kids that have varied skill levels. We have some advanced players and some beginners. And so differentiation is the norm in athletics and in extracurriculars, and it should be the norm in every classroom within what's feasible. You're not going to individualize for 30 kids or 160 kids every day, but good coaches differentiate and good teachers can as well. And finally, coaches, the best coaches, get their players to self-assess. They analyze how they did individually, and they look at game film in team sports, and they plan how they are going to individually and collectively improve. And so the best coaches, as do the best teachers, engage students in reflection, self-assessment, and goal setting for the future. If we emulated the qualities of the best coaches and sponsors on a regular basis in every classroom, it would immediately improve learning, motivation, and performance.
Yeah, I mean, it's heartening, right? If we could design assessments like the one that you started talking about on an ongoing basis, I mean, school would look very different than it does now.
Yeah, agreed. And I do want to declare that while I am a clear advocate for increasing the use of more authentic performance tasks and projects, in no way am I discounting the virtue and value of more traditional assessments. If we want to see if kids have basic knowledge, a quiz and a test works fine. If we want to see if kids are developing basic skills, we need to assess basic skills in isolation, perhaps, to see if they've mastered them. But I'm simply saying the knowledge and skills should be considered the floor, not the ceiling. And I think right now we have too many assessments that A, are only measuring the things that are easy to test and grade, or B, they emulate the high-stakes standardized tests. And so we see too often in schools, the focus of assessment is only assessing in the classroom what's on the state test in the way it's presented on the state test. So you have a lot of multiple choice format assessments with the assumption that if they practice the look and feel of the state test, they'll do fine on it. But that's wrong for several reasons, not the least of which is some of the most important outcomes of schooling, including the college and career readiness kinds of outcomes, are not easily assessed with multiple choice. And if those are the only assessments we're using, we're doing a disservice to learning and our students.
Yep. And even in independent schools where they don't need to teach to a test, you know, there's the SAT, the ACT, and AP classes. But independently of that, I think one of the interesting challenges too is how do we align ourselves deliberately across, you know, as a school, as an institution where we are measuring student growth over time along these skills, so that it's not just you teaching what you want because you think these are the skills that you like and I'm doing the ones I want, but that as a faculty we're working together to say, you know, we're going to graduate students with these skills and this is how we're going to measure and give feedback on it over time.
Absolutely. Coincidentally, I just returned from the Ed Leader 21 conference, their international conference, in which a lot of the conversation was around these very points. I'm also on the advisory board of the Mastery Transcript Consortium, which is an effort to really try to expand the conception of what constitutes evidence of learning and performance, and trying to get colleges to open up a bit beyond just the easy to count GPA and AP SAT scores.
Yeah.
So I'm an advocate for these movements.
Yeah, that's great. Are there any other, this might be a nice place to end, give people some time to go on a web hunt. Are there any other tools or sites that really spark your excitement lately? The Ed Leader 21, the MTC, anything else come to mind? Oh
yeah, there are many. I'll give you just a couple. So one is the Scale performance task collection that's developed or made available through Stanford University. It's called Scale. You should be able to Google it. They've had a multi-year effort for collecting performance tasks from multiple sources, vetting them, and then putting them into a searchable database. It used to be a project restricted to member states, but it is now thankfully wide open. It's an amazing, rich collection of many good performance assessment resources. Another one of my favorites is the Literacy Design Collaborative, ldc.org. Again, an amazing collection of what they call task templates that are not simply assessments, although they can be used for assessments. They're really the performances around which we build units of study and curriculum. And it's a free resource, ldc.org. A third one is called Defined STEM. And Defined STEM is a paid site. You would subscribe as a school or district, get a license. But they have an impressive collection of authentic performance tasks stimulated by really interesting real-world videos of learning applied in various contexts. It's definitely worth checking out. I mean, I could tell you another dozen, but those are top for me.
Yeah, that's great. Jay, I want to thank you for your time. It was great to connect and to get to chat about these things. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay, well, good luck with the assessment course, and enjoy being with you.